The African Center for Green Economy, if I may just say one or two things about us, we've been around for the last 10 years. I founded the center right after finishing my PhD at university. So this was a very important year for us, our 10th anniversary. And really, our agenda for setting the African Center for Green Economy was we wanted to set up a platform for emerging leaders on the continent to be at the forefront of driving the continent's development agenda. And I can proudly say that in the last 10 years, we have done incredible work in terms of creating the kind of platform that is required. And as a think tank, really our key goal is how do we build the evidence base to ensure that policy making is driven by up-to-date information that really reflects the reality on the ground. But more importantly, we realize the importance of bottom-up approaches so that we really test what is happening on the ground, what are the kind of business models that are required on the ground, what are the kind of policies that need to be implemented on the ground, and how do we transition that to the policy-making level. So we see ourselves as an intermediary entity or an agent where I oftentimes say we come from these communities. We went to school bare feet. We understand, we have lived hungry in these communities. But at the same time, we can navigate spaces like that. So we really, our agent is how do we close this global issues where at the higher level, oftentimes resources are lying. No one knows how to get them on the ground. Yet we've just heard earlier on from the mayor who's grappling at the local level. How do we make resources trickle on the ground? So we position ourselves as a think tank around this space to try to translate some of these challenges, these opportunities to where really change needs to happen. And I'm sure we're all aware that, you know, the climate crisis we face is a wicked problem. And wicked problems don't have an obvious answer. It's not, you can't just tick one box and therefore arrive at a solution. And wicked problems, oftentimes what they require is collective action because we are in this together. We cannot do this in isolation. You cannot work on these issues alone as a private sector. You cannot work on these issues alone as government. You cannot work on these issues alone as civil society. And so for me, when I was thinking about conceptualizing this session, I was debating what is it the best way to convene this kind of session. And one of the things that I arrived at is like collaboration is really critical to help us address the climate crisis. In fact, for years, my mantra has always been that, you know, collaboration is the currency of the new economy. Without collaboration, without holding hands, we'll never be able to deliver anything. So it gives me immense pleasure to introduce this highly esteemed panel that I'll be hosting this afternoon to tackle the issue around collaboration. How do we build effective partnerships? And what are the kind of things that we need to do to ensure that we transition collectively, we transition in a way that no one is left behind. So I'd like to take this opportunity to call out our panelists. If I call a name, then you can come on the stage. First of all, I would like to take the honor to welcome Dr. Frank Regisband, who is the, I hope I pronounced that name right, who is the Director General of the Global Green Growth Institute. We're very delighted to have you here, Dr. Frank. Much appreciated. It's quite ironical because the African Center for Green Economy was founded 10 years ago, and the GGI was also founded 10 years ago. But it's the first time I'm sharing a platform with the GGI. So the need for collaboration is indeed important. So thank you for joining us. The second on the panel I would like to invite is Elizabeth Gulugulu, who is the global focal point of the official UN Child and Youth sector. If I'm right, you correct me. Thank you, Elizabeth. And after Elizabeth, we have Noella Molefe, who is the Senior Advisor on Just Transition with Eskom Holdings South Africa. Welcome, Noella. And after Noella, we have Dr. Eric Tambo, who is Head of Technical Collaboration at the UN University in Bonn. Thank you, Eric, for joining us. And finally, we have Kwame Ababio, who is a senior program specialist with the African Union in charge of technical cooperation. Welcome, Kwame. As you can see, we have a very nice spread from a local to a global level, in recognition of the challenges that we face, that it's quite systemic. We need to collaborate, we need to work with each other. So it's really a pleasure to welcome all of you to this panel. And just, collaboration, as has been alluded to, is really critical in making things happen. And we'll all agree where the South Africa Pavilion, and in many respects, this COP has been about South Africa and the South Africa's just energy transition. So I'd like to just take a few, I would like Noella to basically give us a few words around what does Eskom understand about the just transition, and what are you doing to ensure that it is delivered and makes a difference to the most vulnerable communities in South Africa so that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. As mentioned, my name is Noella, working in the Just Energy Transition Office for Eskom in South Africa. And when we started this development of the Just Energy Transition Strategy about 3 years ago, we were very clear that we needed to transition. We needed to transition from a coal base to cleaner energy. We're also very clear that some of our power stations would need to shut down. But what we were not so clear about was the just aspects. How do we make sure that people are taken along on the journey, that we leave no one behind, our employees, communities, and the economy is taken into consideration? And with that, we had to dig deeper. We had to look at how, as Eskom, do we plan to transition not only our coal fleet, but also take our people along. And for us, the Just Energy Transition is about creating sustainable jobs and also high quality jobs. It's very important that we ensure that those that are in the coal value chain also are able to transition into the renewable energy industry. And it's also about the socioeconomic impacts. And that is something that was very important for us. And therefore, we started the process of developing socioeconomic impact assessment studies. And we started with the 3 power stations that were due for shutdown, being Komati, Grootvlei, and Hendrina power stations. And these studies were basically about understanding the status quo. What is the current situation in the local communities, and what the impacts that the power stations will, the shutting down of the power stations will have on the communities, the local businesses, the economy as a whole. And it was a long journey. It took quite a long time. We only recently finalized our Komati power station socioeconomic impact studies most recently. But we are in the process of developing studies for our other stations that are going to be shut down soon, the other 7 power stations. And this is very important because the just aspects need to be really considered. Another aspect that we're focusing on is reskilling and upskilling. That is a priority for Eskom as well, to reskill not only our employees, but also to reskill the community members. The just transition is not only for Eskom, it's about the broader communities, and how can we enable them to grow in the renewable energy sector? How can they also thrive in that sector? So I'll stop there. Allow my...
Just a follow-up question. Okay. Eskom is obviously an engineering firm.
Yes.
And you're talking about, social cohesion, you're talking about reskilling. You obviously can't do this on your own. Can you just elaborate to us more about the kind of partnerships that you have or you need to put in place to make this happen?
Okay. Sure, definitely. We are not able to do this on our own, and therefore partnerships and collaboration is crucial. We're collaborating with quite a number of people. Firstly is the Mpumalanga province, and there we are collaborating on the whole just energy transition. How do we take people who are in the coal value chain and enable them to work in the renewable energy sector? We also recently opened a Komati training facility at a Komati power station. And with this, we collaborated with GEP, who are funding the training facility. We're also collaborating with the University of Cape Peninsula Technology, as well as Saratech, which is the South African Renewable Energy Technology Center. And we're collaborating with them because they are accredited, they are an accredited institution. They also offer accredited training courses specifically for solar, wind, and other courses that we are going to collaborate with them on. So it's a partnership so that we, as Eskom, we do not have the accreditation. We are unable to train our own employees, but we are working with them so that we can enable our employees and community members. We're also collaborating with the World Bank. That is something as well for the repowering and repurposing of our projects. But yeah, there are quite a few collaborations. The Dutch Embassy as well. With them, we are collaborating on repurposing our Grootfontein power station. And there we're looking at agricultural opportunities. So there are a number of collaborations that we're looking into. And like I said, we cannot do this on our own, and we need to work with a various number of stakeholders who can assist us with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Noella, for an excellent elaboration of what Eskom is doing. I would like to scale up a little bit and slightly move to what is actually happening within the continent. So I want to invite Kwame to make remarks on behalf of what African Union is actually driving through to make sure that African countries collaborate with each other in terms of meeting their NDCs, because ultimately, it has been said in this discussion, South Africa essentially is a benchmark for what could happen in the rest of the continent. And already in the previous session, questions have already been asked around the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and how do we make sure that South Africa is connected to the rest of the continent. I have a very vested interest in that because I'm originally from Uganda, but I've lived in South Africa for 18 years. I went to school in Kenya. I've got a bit of heritage in South Sudan. So I have a trajectory across the continent. And it's always been my mission to say, how can we connect South Africa to the rest of the continent? Over to you, Kwame.
Thank you very much, Mao, for this opportunity. With regards to the question you asked, I mean, without doubt, we all know that the NDCs are at the center of the climate actions. They form the bulk of what needs to be done for the rest of the continent to transition in a just manner, in a way that also is transformative and carries along the millions of our people from the current state of poverty into one of well-being and better livelihoods. So at the level of the African Union, we have recently developed and also adopted through the mechanism of the heads of state, an African Union climate change and resilient strategy. So this strategy is supposed to be a guide for member countries to help them in implementing the various climate actions, the various environmental actions, and particularly with the NDCs. And if you look at NDCs as they were framed initially ahead of COP21 in Paris, the level of collaboration, the level of engagement between the lead ministries, that is the Ministry of Environment, and the very important sectors, agriculture, energy, it was very much lacking. So if you look at the first iteration of the NDCs, you realize that not much went into it, not much analytical work went into it to develop those NDCs. But in the second iteration of the NDCs, we are starting to see a very strong collaboration between the various ministries, which is good because when we talk about climate actions, we are not looking at the environmental component of it. And the attendance here at the COP is ample testimony to that. We are seeing people from all sectors because the issues of climate affect each and every sector. So, for instance, in South Africa, the approach is to have a whole of government approach, just not dealing with just one ministry, but bringing all actors on board because this is a national development issue. And so if you look at the position of the African Union on this, it is that let's not isolate the issues. Let's bring all of these issues together issues around gender, forestry, whatever the issue is, let's aggregate them and work towards a common goal. That is why we have been promoting the position that the nationally determined contributions should be part and parcel of a national strategy. It should not be one that is sitting in one particular ministry. And so in a few countries that we've worked with, they've set up country level engagement processes, bringing together the different ministries to work together. And then also, even at the level of the regional economic communities, we've seen a lot of the regional economic communities coming together and having a peer exchange of ideas around how to implement the NDCs. And we think that going forward, this is going to be the structure within which the NDCs have to be implemented. One, driven from the bottom, from communities, because at the end of the day, it is the communities that are affected the most. I mean, you look at issues, for instance, around climate financing. There is a very staggering statistic that I came across the other time. Between 2003 and 2016, less than 10% of all climate financing actually reached local actors. And this is climate financing from all sources. Less than 10% of it reached local actors. So you are looking at farmers, you are looking at fishermen, those who matter the most. Less than 10% of that resource went to them. So it tells us that there is a lot more work that needs to be done to ensure that financing, the resourcing that is available should actually reach those who need it, those at the bottom end. It will take collaboration, it will take a very strong national policy environment to be able to drive this process.
I'm so glad. I'm sure SALGA, which is South African Local Government Association, will be very keen to engage with you around that. Elizabeth, you know, talking about leaving no one behind, talking about making sure that climate finance and resources flow to those who matter most. Africa is a young continent, but if you drive across Africa from, you know, Cape Town to Asmara, we're talking about, you know, unemployment rate of average of 40%, 50, 60% plus. What are you hearing? Do you think that the message is going in a way that will enhance young people's, or what can be done to ensure that actually young people can participate much more effectively in this process to ensure that they essentially are not left behind?
Thank you so much for the question. I think that is a very critical question that you have heard, that you have asked, and we continue seeing the gaps that are there in the African continent. And in as much as we gather here to talk about a just transition, the green jobs, but it is also important to understand what it means from a youth perspective and why we do have a larger percentage of young people who are not employed. So the thing is, there is a huge gap. I'm glad he was talking about the NDCs because this is where it all starts. When we look at the NDCs are going to determine what kind of jobs are going to be unlocked in which sector by what kind of year, right? Now we are now in the implementation phase of the NDCs. The gaps that are now there are lack of skills. The jobs could be there, but there are lack of skills. I'll give you an example. In my country, there was a green jobs assessment model that was done in 2020. The green jobs assessment model highlighted that from 10 to 15 years time, there could be potential of jobs in Zimbabwe from hydro energy. But unfortunately, these jobs cannot be called green jobs for the reasons being, we do not have the expertise. So we are going to import human labor into our country. We're going to import engineers to work in those spaces. So this is the gap that is actually there. So it is very important. I mean, we have SDG 17 for a reason, partnership of the goals. Young people, they need to be coordinated. Even the organizations and the private sector themselves, they need to be coordinated. What we need to do is to support and upskill young people, as she was saying, because we have lack of skills. We have gone to school, but as it stands, we are importing our solar panels. If the solar panels are not working, we export them to another country for them to recycle. We cannot even doing it. But if we export the solar or the electric waste, we're exporting jobs. So we need to make sure that it's a circular economy whereby young people can get to manufacture, repair, and unlock more jobs. Could it be in the agricultural sector, waste sector, industrial processes and product use, the renewable energy sector? If we manage to do that and mobilize resources to make sure that we build the skills for young people, I think we would have solved the issues that are currently happening in the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I just have a quick follow-up question. Now, just a question and comment. I've been very impressed in how the youth and child constituency of the UNFCCC have been engaged. The work that you've been leading at the UNFCCC, very impressive. Because I mean, if you look at previous COPs and so on, young people had never been part of this kind of processes. Are there any pockets of excellence, stories of how you think effective partnerships that will really empower young people? Are there any examples of what you think really works that needs to be, you know, scaled up, needs to be replicated elsewhere?
Yes, I'm afraid if I start talking about examples, I might take 24 hours, you know, talking about examples. But for us, what's important is to make sure that we advocate from policy level. Of course, we have some of us who are activists, but young people, we cannot categorize them in the same group. We have a lot of young people that are in the negotiation rooms. Last year itself, we have 3 articles that are referring to young people, Articles 63, 64, and 65. And this has helped to engage young people in the policy teams whereby they can negotiate. The reason we have these good stories is because once we advocate at policy level, it then becomes easy for us to implement it. So I've given a reference of these 3 articles, but we have also managed to secure youth seat boards in the CTCN, which is quite a good thing for us. We have young people that are actually advocating for technology transfers within the CTCN board. This has never happened before, but I will end here.
Frank, I'll come to you, but I first want to go to Eric. Eric, you know, it has been mentioned clearly around the challenge on job creation, the hurdles around the innovation ecosystem and things like that. How do we ensure that actually the innovation ecosystem is effective so that those kind of jobs that Elizabeth is actually talking about do not get exported elsewhere, but those jobs can actually be created? Any insights that you can share for us from your work around innovation and working with youth across the continent?
Yes, many thanks, Mao, for the kind invitation to join this panel and to share a bit what we are doing at the United Nations University with regard to supporting youth in green innovation and entrepreneurship. So I think what the colleagues was talking about is a bit, it's a complex issues because it's the issues we have to deal with capacity building. So this export of job that has also been clearly mentioned, which go in many of the African countries in the reform at the university of the curricula to address, to design the curricula which fit more or less to the request of the market. But beside that, I think what at least give a kind of hope in the continent is that through the development of social media and internet, the university is not only the place now where youth could get knowledge, at least to develop innovation. If you look in the continent, for example, innovation like the M-Pesa in East Africa have been driven by technology and innovation hub, which are more or less spaces, informal spaces where if a youth identify a problem with some skills that he can also take in internet, can directly design solution, at least to address this problem. And the challenge now is how can we replicate the success model that we have in the mobile sectors, in the fintech technology, for example, in this wicked problem like water, renewable energy, waste management, which are more related to green jobs. So when you are talking on fintechs, you don't need a lot of infrastructures to design the solution. So you just need your computer and you identify the problem. But when you are going into sectors like water, when you are going into sectors like renewable energy, it's become a bit more complex because sometimes infrastructure are required. But even at this level, there are opportunity, frontier technology, artificial intelligence, blockchain on energy management, on peer-to-peer, blockchain for peer-to-peer energy payment. So I think the question now is how to create the conducive environment so to enable youth at least to do this kind of innovation. What we have some project at the United Nations University where we are experimenting on setting up this kind of environment. So we will also have on Monday a panel on talking on multi-stakeholders engagement to support youth and women entrepreneurship. Our approach in this project is as enabler at the United Nations University to bring the different actors which are necessarily to support, let's say, to strengthen the ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship. These actors are, for example, the AfriLab, so which is the umbrella association of technology and innovation hub in the continent. In South Africa, you may have 5 or 10 tech hubs which are members of AfriLab. In one of the project, we also have BC for Africa, which is more or less an association of venture capitalists which provide seed funding to innovators. We bring other actors like the UNFCCC, which are the interfaces at the policy level to identify how the interaction or the ecosystem work, and at least to address the policy issues. We bring the university, the United Nations University or the Pan-African University, and we create now, let's say, a framework where we have a kind of educational materials which are targeted to provide hard skills to these innovators. Hard skills when we are talking in the climate action, for example, enable to design an innovation around the carbon emission, you need to understand a bit the mechanism as an innovator, as an entrepreneur. We develop a kind of courses in this domain, and we combine that with entrepreneurial skills. And we provide also seed fund to an innovator, to youth, at least now to come up with ideas which will be incubated and in a certain mature stage will not be taken by venture capital. That is an example on how we bring different stakeholders together to design an environment which is conducive for youth to innovate and to generate jobs in the green sectors.
Thanks, Eric. Very well elaborated. I want to go to Dr. Frank. Dr. Frank, first of all, I would like you to highlight some of the interventions that DGI is doing across the continent in terms of uplifting, the continent, particularly from a renewable energy perspective. Energy access still remains a big challenge across the continent. If I look at where I'm based in South Africa, for example, the communities that we work with in the Northern Cape province, there's massive solar plants that are pumping onto the grid, to Eskom. But we have communities that have never had energy access. What do we actually do to ensure that these communities, if they don't get onto the grid, they actually have the required energy access? The same to Uganda. We just completed a survey as part of this IDRC project we're collaborating on. We interviewed about 480 entrepreneurs in the Western region of Uganda to look at what are some of the challenges they face in terms of energy access. And it's daunting. Oftentimes, someone runs a business that is a million business, but in a day they only have 3 hours of electricity. There's no way you're going to lift people out of poverty if you don't actually address the critical challenge of energy access. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you to give me a chance to speak. So I am Frank Rijsberman. I'm the lead of the organization living in Seoul, Korea, but I'm actually standing in for Dr. Mala Fofana, our regional director for Africa, who is going to be here when this was at a different time slot. We are not actually a think tank like you are. We are an intergovernmental organization, indeed only about 10 years old. So we support our member countries, 45 of them right now, plus another 20 who are ratifying our treaty to accelerate the green transition. We're unfortunately not in South Africa, but we are in Uganda and in Ethiopia, Rwanda, Senegal, and a number of countries. With our staff sitting in Ministries of Finance, Environment, to do the kind of stuff that we are discussing here. And we're working with the African Union on your GRUP, the Green Recovery Action Plan for Africa, which is all about green jobs, right? Unfortunately, too few countries have actually taken advantage of all the money flowing to recovering from the pandemic to create green jobs. We've been coming up with studies. One of them is a nice one that relates totally to what you were describing for Eskom. In Colombia, they have coal mines. They're very worried that people who will lose their jobs when the country closes the coal mines will be unemployed. So we actually did a study to show that in those 6 districts where there are 60,000 jobs currently in the coal mines, which are going to be going away when the coal mines close. If the country actually focuses on the forest economy, on the non-timber forest industry, on opportunities to give people livelihoods from forest-related products, there can be more than 60,000 jobs created in those same districts. But of course, it's not necessarily the same people. So there has to be an effort to retrain. There has to be an effort for upskilling, for getting young people jobs in those bioeconomy or forest economy parts of in that case, Colombia. But we've done studies looking at the NDCs that countries submit. And in those NDCs, we're generally only talking about how greenhouse gas emissions can reduce. Very few countries actually look at the green jobs that can be created in renewable energy or in reforestation in the forest economy. In fact, there are millions of those jobs. And yes, some of them, people don't have the skills, and there is a risk that they will not be in the same country. So we do need investment in just transition. And we do need, as almost all of us have been talking about, investments in giving young people a chance to become entrepreneurs. So I'm glad to hear about all the green entrepreneurship programs that we're talking about. We also are talking about that, giving young people a chance to become agri-entrepreneurs or green entrepreneurs, whether it's in waste management, or we have a project to train, that's not young people, actually grandmothers, solar grandmothers, to say older women in the community who people listen to. If you train them as technicians so that they can help people maintain the solar home systems, they can train young people to become solar technicians. There are a lot of opportunities for people as you asked about energy. Yes, we need some very large plants like ESCOMs, but I think across Africa, we need much more decentralized small systems. Solar home systems or village systems, you know, the kind of systems that people can then indeed maintain themselves and use for their homes, but also for water pumping, using it for solar irrigation. Quite a few projects we've been doing from Uganda to Ethiopia to Burkina to Senegal are about solar irrigation as part of climate smart agriculture. And in some countries like Senegal, where they already have irrigation with very high prices for energy coming from the grid, the solar irrigation is putting solar panels so that farmers pay less for their energy to pump. But in other countries like Burkina or Uganda, where they're having rain-fed agriculture and where they're having increasing trouble with droughts, it is providing solar-powered irrigation system together with training for farmers on how to use them so that their agriculture becomes more climate resilient. And there are a whole series of new jobs in the value chains, from farming to food production, all the way down to indeed improved nutrition as well. So I think there are lots of opportunities for young people, maybe not to become farmers like your grandparents, but to become agripreneurs, right? I think a more modern interpretation of agri-food systems and linking, as they do here in Egypt, energy, agriculture, water, and food, right? That, I think, is a critical nexus for many African countries. Increasing energy access for homes, but also for agriculture and for generating jobs. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. I would like to make this a conversation. So I'd like to open to the audience if there's any questions from even the previous session that you would like to ask for the panelists before I come for second round of comments and the closing remarks. Any questions? Okay, so one of the questions that arose from the, do you have a question? Oh yes, of course. There's a mic there. There's a mic there. If you can introduce your name and your affiliation, please. Thank you.
I'm Tembe Gamtun from South Africa. My question is directed to ESCOM. Thank you very much for the way you presented it, your input. My question is on the reskilling of the community. When you talk about the reskilling of the community, what is it that it entails? Secondly, and as you talk about the just transition, strategy that you are engaging on. What about the labor? I know we are talking about the skilling of your own labor, but you have amongst your labor force those that are at an advanced age. What is your plan with them? Do you have a strategy about them within your organization, ESCOM? Can't remember the
Kwame.
yeah, Kwame. He spoke about the climate change strategy for Africa. How far do you assist different governments in terms of inputting into their climate change act? Whilst it's still a bill, while it's being in the process, so that we can show that we have an output that is talking to the strategy that you are presenting. Thank you.
Any other? Yes, we'll take those two questions and then we can go for another round. Yes, go ahead. Your name and affiliation.
My name is Ntivi Mudis. I'm still a pedestrian from Cape Town. I realized that you were running away from the question on Africa Intertrade because I thought you were going to start with it, but you did not. But I'll pose it.
My apology.
It's fine. I'll pose it differently this time. But I take in interest in this topic. But I want to know so that Africa were able to harness the resources and the moment of change that is being brought by climate change. Because if we're not appreciating that as a fact, and there's a lot that needs to be done, how do we then take advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement by promoting intra-African trade through renewable energy? I apologize, the question might not be directed to any specific presenter because I quickly went out for some air when the earlier session attended.
Thank you. Your question is definitely spot on, and I think that because of that, I will prioritize the panelists responding. You know, it's absolutely critical that we have to connect Africa better, and I oftentimes say that my center is located in Cape Town deliberately because I want to deliberately make the connection to the rest of the continent, and I think that the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement gives us the tool to really be very deliberate about how we work together. You know, a few years ago, I drove from Cape Town to Kampala, 6,800 kilometers. And the most painful thing across the continent is crossing borders. You know, everyone wants to, you know, so many things happen around borders. But once you enter into the continent, you can park your car on the roadside and nobody minds you. You know, so we really need to unlock those barriers of how we can make Africa work better. But I'm going to let the panelists respond to the free trade area issue, and then your very important issue around communities and reskilling. You know, how I got to know Noella was because I have a student who is doing her master's degree and looking at reskilling issues, and we interrogated her on the same issue. But one of the things I'm very passionate about is, you know, people talk about stranded assets, talking about how, you know, in the transition, some assets are going to be stranded. And my question is, what about stranded communities? What about stranded workers? What are we actually doing to ensure that as we think about stranded assets, we also need to think about these potential communities who are going to be stranded? But I don't want to hog the mic. Who wants to take the question around continental free trade area? I'm looking at you, Kwame. You seem to be obvious one, yeah?
Yes. Okay, so I'll start by responding to the question you raised, Madam. Firstly, about the continental climate change strategy. As you know, the architecture of the African Union is not the same as the European Union. It is more or less an advisory kind of engagement. it's not a stick and carrot process with the African Union because it does not have total control of its member states. So in most cases, what the union does is to propose a certain framework, and then the countries using their own profiles, their own priorities, will then buy into that continental framework. So for instance, this climate change strategy has several components, and adaptation is part of it, mitigation is part of it. So based on the country's own priorities and interests, then they'll choose which one, which angle they want to follow.
That's
So,
very fine. I think
so I
the only
think
thing that I'm very happy about is that I'm being proud of. Because
okay, so clearly, this is what the African Union does in terms of the climate change strategy. But in terms of the implementation proper, we are also able to provide some level of support to the member countries to implement the various components based on the country's own priorities. So then through the priorities, we're able to engage and support that aspect. And then to the question you asked about the, and even just to mention in conclusion to your point, when it comes to the climate change laws, I think with the exception of South Africa, no other country on the continent has specific laws around climate change. So it tells you how advanced South Africa is within this space. What we have is that within the East African community, as a regional economic community, they also have a bill on climate change. But this is a regional bill that needs to be domesticated and ratified in the countries. Not many of the countries have even started doing so. So I think South Africa is clearly an outlier, and a lot of the countries need to learn from that experience. And to the continental free trade area question, very important, the renewable energies. This is what we are focusing on as a continent. But I remember a point that Minister Mantashe has always made. Look, the transition is important. The renewables are good, but let's use what we have to develop. Our focus should be about development. When we use all our gas resources that have been identified, our contribution to global greenhouse emissions is only 1%. It's negligible. So these and many of the resources that we have discovered, I think we need to continuously use them. And that is the narrative that we need to be pushing. In the near future, the just transition will come in, but we need to take our time to use our resources to be able to develop. And then which connects to the point that you make about renewable energy. I think with the different power pools that we have on the continent. So for instance, now that South Africa, and I live in Midrand anyway, so I know what I'm talking about. So, what's this? Okay, is it the mic? You're following the mic, I guess. Okay, so so with this challenge that we are having with energy paucity in the country, if, for instance, we had renewable from another country, we may be able to export it into or import it into South Africa. So if we had a kind of a regional power pool where there are shortages, we'll be able to import them. And I think this is the essence of a continental free trade area. And that is what I think, once the systems are set and the processes have come into play, we'll be able to make use of the excess capacities that are in other countries and import them into where they are needed. Thank you.
Frank has to excuse you. Thank you so much, Frank, for your time. Really appreciate you having around. Thank you.
Thank
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
All right, sure.
Over to you, Noella.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think they're very important questions. So to address the first one about the communities, so I'll start with the process that we've started embarking on with the Komati training facility. We're starting, it's in phases. So the first phase is to have introductory training for the ESCOM employees. And that is to just give them information on what is renewable energy, how you can get into it. Should you not want to continue in the value chain or the coal value chain, what are your options in the renewable energy value chain? That's the first phase. Then afterwards, it's a process of identifying beneficiaries from ESCOM as well as community members who have the minimum requirements that can be trained on solar, wind, and other renewable energy technologies. But we're not only stopping there, that's with Saratech. What we also want to do is to develop development hubs in the communities where community members will be able to go and learn soft skills. How to write a proposal, how to put together a CV. All those soft skills are quite important for the communities, and we've taken that into consideration. And other skills as well. How just, information sharing. So these hubs will be developed in the specific areas that will be affected. And for us to do this, we definitely need private sector investment. We need social partners to come to the table because we need that assistance. We need the partnerships so that we can develop these hubs and so that the communities are not left as ghost communities. They are going to have knowledge about renewable energy. They'll be able to become entrepreneurs in the sector and also be able to transfer skills to other people in the communities and other sectors as well. So the second question was with regards to our labor and the older people at our organization. So we have put together an HR plan. It's a very detailed HR plan for ESCOM staff. And as part of this plan, some people will be transferred from the power station that is being shut down to other power stations. They will be reskilled, upskilled to do other jobs as well or stay in the same field. There will not be any retrenchments. People will not lose their jobs. That is something that we've worked very hard on, making sure that nobody loses a job. For those people who would like to take packages, we will be offering the elderly employees to take a package, but we have various options available for our employees, and that is very detailed in our HR plan. Thanks.
Is there any panelists who want to respond to the issues that are raised, or is there any other questions? Thank you, ma'am. Say your name and the microphone here.
Thank you. My name is Simpiwe Bata from South Africa. I'm interested in ESCOM. What you've presented is very good and it looks good, but I have a problem on the rehabilitation of those 3 power stations. Remember, you've got flying ash that is part of your waste there. What is going to happen to that flying ash? I think it's heaps and heaps there. I know somehow we are recycling it, but into clay bricks. But what is your plan? Because we need to have a rehabilitation of those 3 power stations. Remember, you are supposed to rehabilitate it as the polluter. Thank you.
Is there any other question? I would like to check if there's last questions from the audience, and then we'll open up for the panelists to make final remarks, concluding remarks, and we close because we should be over in the next 4 minutes. So sorry, online audience, my apologies for not keeping you in the room. It's very difficult to have a hybrid, but there's a question that came online looking specifically around funding and how funding, as entrepreneurs, they could access that funding. And I would like to direct that question to Eric from an innovation perspective, understanding of the ecosystem, and to Elizabeth for operating in this space with young people where funding is obviously a question that keeps coming up quite a lot, especially early stage enterprises. Yes, one question there, and then we make a, yes, microphone coming through.
Thank you, Simpiwe Siawanta from Zambia. I want to ask a question. What's your plan? What's your future plan with your investment relationship from the Zambian government, ZESCO, and ESCOM from South Africa, in order to reduce load shedding in our region, so that we can build a 24-hour economy in our region to improve our trade system? Thank you.
Very good question, which alludes to the power pool issue and to some level the continental free trade area. I don't want to make this an ESCOM session, so and I don't want to put you on the spot. If there are questions that are not in your domain, please, it's okay to pass them. But just respond to the questions that have been raised and make your concluding remarks. Then we can close.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thanks for the question with regards to the ash. ESCOM has plans. Each power station has a repowering and repurposing plan. And as part of that, we are considering how to rehabilitate our land. It is something that is an issue. We're looking at ash beneficiation. What can we do with the ash? Where can we put the ash? And as one of the other options is to put solar PV on a rehabilitated ash dam. So there are plans as part of our repurposing and repowering, but the details of that would be in the site-specific plan for how to rehabilitate once the power station has been shut down. Thanks.
And your concluding remarks? That's it? Cool, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Your last word.
My last words. Okay. I think this discussion was very informative, and thank you so much for having us here. I think some of the challenges that we're having with collaboration and being able to partner with various partners is that we need alignment, policy alignment, regulatory alignment. If our energy, industrial, environmental policies could all be aligned, that would be very, very helpful. And as well as public sector private sector involvement, I think it's so essential for us to get private sector to be involved, to assist with investments so that we can implement all of the social projects that we have. And yeah, just to make sure that as ESCOM, we can transition. I think we need to collaborate and participate with other game players in the sector. Thanks.
Thank you. The funding question from online, if you can attempt, you are the UN, Elizabeth, you must have money. Young people want that money. Can you deliver?
Yeah, one thing that I want to mention, I think whoever asked the question online, I want to be real, right? I've been talking about the importance of upskilling. When you're looking at upskilling, it's not only a matter of upskilling in renewable energy, etc. and stuff. It's also a matter of, building the skills for young people to understand the importance of creating sustainable and good relationships with partners. A relationship is reciprocal. If I'm to go today and ask her some funds, definitely she will not give me because she doesn't know me, right? But if if any other young person whom they've been working with ask for funds from ESCOM, there is a high probability that they are going to get the funds because of the relationship that has been created over time. This is what happens when it comes to funding. Funding, when we are talking about funding, we need to make sure that at least we try by all means to establish good relationships between youth networks, youth organizations, and the donors. That is very important. At school, they will not teach you all this. But when you're in the space, you will see that this is a very critical and important skill to have. When we come here at COP, it's not a matter of taking pictures with big people, but it's a matter of making sure that when they leave this place, they at least remember your name. They might not remember your name, but at least they might remember some of the initiatives that you have done. When you meet next year, COP28, you're now updating them. Oh, by the way, I was doing A, B, C, and D. I now have a prototype. It's now easy to engage. Even when you ask for funding, you might not get them the first time, but you might eventually get to get them because you're building a relationship. So this is what I would like to encourage most of us, that it's all about building relationship. I do not want to start talking about the platforms that offer funding. I mean, we have loads of platforms. But I just wanted to make sure that we at least try to understand and take this very serious. Thank you.
Elizabeth, can you write a book, please, and we will distribute it via WhatsApp. Eric, any final conclusions?
Yes, I think Elizabeth touched upon the point that I wanted to bring, because in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, there's a lot of venture capital which are looking for good ideas. Even in the program that we are implementing two two programs, one on engaging youth in climate action, where we give seed funding to some of the youth, and the northern green sectors. We will launch around March next year the call, where around 30 students will be supported with seed funding to develop ideas. But the experiences that we have realized is that, as you say, you have to be prepared in order to request for funding. To be prepared means in most of the program, we need to have youth which have already advanced ideas of what they want to do. So meaning, and you can use this time before going for funding, you can go in the tech hub in your city, try now to materialize your ideas in something concrete. Use the Fab Lab if you are developing a technological solution to come with a prototype. If you reach this level, then you will be able to see now all the opportunities of program which are there to incubate youth. So that is more or less the advice that I will give. At least use the time first before going for funding to mature the ideas that you have, even if you don't go into a prototype, but to have something more concrete that when there's a call, there are a lot for the development in the development corporations, and there are a lot of programs aiming to support youth to mature their ideas. But then sometimes it's not so always easy to select the one who have already ideas. Just to say the money is not the problem, it's more make the first step, prepare your, do your homework, come with a clear ideas or a small prototype, and then you will see. Connect with the tech hub in your city, and then they are also connected to different programs when it comes to pitches, when it's come. So just connect to this tech hub, and then you will see now with your initial idea or prototype the different opportunity that will come to you.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks everyone for your excellent inputs. I mean, for young people who are online, who are looking, or even in the room, who are looking for funding, it's very clear. You know, you must build your capacity, have the right networks, and I always say, don't be afraid to have your voices heard. And I'm glad that you asked this kind of question. One of the key things we're actually doing at the African Center for Green Economy, which we want to announce at this session, is setting up a Green Innovation Hub, which is really to coordinate this information flow so that we can really connect entrepreneurs to the kind of information that they require, whether it's a mentorship, whether it's funding, and so on, but on a platform that would be able to respond to many of these questions that entrepreneurs pose. Ladies and gentlemen, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to say thank you so much for your time, for this engaging session. I think it's been brilliant. You all agree with me. And just also to our partners in Dialogue for the previous session who have collaborated many years, and to our funders, the International Development Research Center, and everyone who has stand up for this session, and to NBI for giving us the platform to showcase the work that we do. You know, when I was thinking about the last concluding remarks, and I'm looking at the panel here, and it's completely not by design. I'm originally from Uganda, via South Africa. I've lived there for 18 years. Kwame is from Ghana, Noella is from South Africa, Elizabeth is from Zimbabwe, Eric is from Cameroon, you know, from all across the continent, or corners of the continent. And I think that is really what the Africa requires, that we need to hold hands when we are friends. Continent, Africa is our home, and we need to be very deliberate about making an impact in the lives of our people. Thank you so much for your time. Hope to see you around. Much appreciated.